Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me.
Hereditary is not a bad movie. With perfect sets, props, lighting, and a soundtrack that is thematic to the plot, Ari Aster's project is an open door to a new subject in the horror genre. It's one of the reasons I began reviewing movies, because I realized that horror films and fiction films are more than a plot. The execution and production were essential for Hereditary's success in the box office. However, critics mostly agree that there is a problem within the best horror movie of 2018 that keeps it from being a Kubrick or Carpenter horror masterpiece. That is the horror element of realism. I'm not going to sit and suck this movie's cock like most reviewers. If you have seen the film, then you know why it genuinely scared its viewers. But instead of recapping, I'm going to explain why it had this effect, and it is because of two factors: marketing and misdirection. It is no secret that the marketing for this movie was purposely focused on the character of Charlie, played by Millie Shapiro. It was presented as a film where the conflict would be between the mother Annie, played by Toni Collette, and her daughter, in some sort of haunted house scenario. The true protagonist isn't really in the trailer, appearing barely 5 times with only one long scene. After rewatching the trailer for Hereditary in preparation for this director's newest movie this summer, it was clear that Ari Aster and A24 was promoting this as a supernatural horror that seemed to match the tone of the last 30 to 40 minutes of the actual film, knowing the audience would be caught off guard when the movie's inciting conflict occurs. This first conflict makes the rest of this movie, well, up to a certain scene which we'll get to, feel more like a nuclear fallout of raw emotions following a tragedy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Pretentious or not, the lie used to draw in an audience expecting a jump scare horror was necessary in an age of horror schlock like Insidious or Conjuring movies, where the horror comes from the unstoppable cliche evil and the cheap overproduced effects. This movie had a different agenda, and the unstoppable evil that drives the plot seems more entangled with fate. Well, again, until the scene which we'll get to. Hereditary is a movie that must be watched twice in order to fully enjoy. When viewing it the first time, I had missed visual themes and plot devices necessary to make the outcome seem more out of the protagonist's control. Things explained or shown at the beginning are reflected and mirrored by the end. Props, dialogues, and visual aesthetics will appear more clearly in a second viewing, which leads me to my first problem of this movie. Is the audience supposed to be watching from the victim's point of view, or from the secret cult that knows all the future events? If it's the first point of view, then why are there so many controlling clues that scream foreshadowing that aren't visible until a second viewing? And if it's the second point of view, is it a little pretentious and cheap to have your audience watch a movie twice to fully get it? There is no clear answer to the perspective the audience has. It kinda depends on the individual and how much he or she wants to take in from the moving pictures. This video has moved away from my original intention, so I'm going to try and cut to the chase. Realism in horror is much like light in space. It exists on a spectrum, and where it is placed on that spectrum will color a movie differently. Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity have extreme realism, rather than The Devil's Rejects and Evil Dead. Realism isn't a good or bad thing either. It just depends on how to present a story and message to the viewer. Hereditary, until again a certain scene that jeopardizes everything, is depressingly real. For anyone who has experienced unexpected tragedies, this film hits too close to home. It captures the raw, uncomfortable feelings in a calm bystander display. The movie is basically a family drama with just a subtle dab of supernatural questioning, where throughout the movie the characters seem to deteriorate naturally, but the audience is always questioning if it is because of something otherworldly. The best example of this are the dream sequences. They seem awake at first, but elevate into very real feeling nightmares, with imagery described earlier in the movie. Toni Collette's character has a history of schizophrenia in their family, which leads to the first red herring I thought the movie was going to explore. That the hereditary gene that runs in the family is the breaking of sanity after a tragedy, a very common and real thing that trauma victims are known to experience. People handle tragedy and grieving in different ways, and hereditary genetics can control someone's emotions chemically. Therefore, after Charlie's death, we experience 3 different grieving mechanisms within the remaining characters. Having been present at the scene of Charlie's death, Peter is left with the guilt of his sister's death in a questionable way. Was it all coincidence that everything that happened at this party led in a perfect order to Charlie's death, which plays into this overarching idea of destiny? Or was everything truly Peter's fault, because instead of watching his sister, he was getting high upstairs, and without paying attention to the road, he inadvertently got Charlie killed? Both explanations are unsettling to Peter, which makes the feeling of guilt that much heavier on the teenager. We see this in a scene where he and his friends are getting high after school. Peter finally lets out all of his emotions of guilt and frustration that there really wasn't anything that he could do to help his sister. The father figure is probably the most realistic of all the characters, especially when he is to be the straight man who is trying to move on while the rest of his family simply can't. He goes to work and tries to bring the normalcy back to his family's life. When Annie starts talking about communicating with Charlie via the glass and chalkboard, Steve doesn't believe her, and when it does start working, he is quick to try and stop Annie's connection. Even if Annie could communicate with their daughter, Steve knows it wouldn't be healthy for her to refuse to let their daughter go. He is the protector of the normalcy, and unknowingly stands before the series of events set forth by the satanic cult. This is why in the third act, Steve is the first one targeted by the family's demon. Pages upon pages could be written about Annie in this movie. She is the most complex character, leaving the audience to wonder if she was the antagonist of most of the movie. I think it's worth noting the 2 ways that Annie grieves between her mother and her daughter. When her mother dies, it almost feels like a chore to Annie. Her mother was a sadistic abuser who led other people in her family to suicide, and Annie had never forgiven her, casting herself far from her mother. When Charlie dies, we are given much more of a guttural and possible reaction.
I just want to die. Oh, God.
Where Annie goes as far as to go to a support group for help, something that she didn't need for her mother. Her lack of care for her work and her family begins to grow more serious in each passing scene. And when the dinner scene comes, just like her mother for killing her brother, Annie will not forgive her son even though she knows that the accident was not intentionally his fault.
I've tried saying
Okay, so
things.
try again. Release yourself.
Oh, release you mean?
Yeah, fine. Release me. Just say it. Just fucking say it.
Don't you swear at me, you little shit! Don't you ever raise your voice at me! I am your mother! Do you understand? All I do is worry and slave and defend you, and all I get back is that fucking face on your face! so full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed. Well, now your sister is dead. And I know you miss her. And I know it was an accident, and I know you're in pain, and I wish I could take that away for you. I wish I could shield you from the knowledge that you did what you did, but your sister is dead. She is gone forever. And what a waste. If it could have maybe brought us together or something. If you could have just said, I'm sorry, or faced up to what happened. Maybe then we could do something with this, but you can't take responsibility for anything. So now I can't accept, and I can't forgive, because nobody admits anything they've done.
It is an interesting dynamic between these two characters, and it is reflected in the dream sequences shown throughout the movie. Unable to forgive Peter, Annie is ready to pour gasoline on herself and her child. This idea being not only does she escape her unbearable amount of grief, but also gets to destroy what caused that grief in the first place. The symbolism of Annie killing herself to kill Peter with fire finally comes in the third act of the movie, where Annie is taken over by this demon who is now going after her son. Grief has an interesting effect on individuals. It can bring out our primal instincts and characteristics more profoundly. If it is breaking the hard exterior to reveal a guilt-ridden sensitive side, focusing solely on work in order to rebuild the normalcy tragedy had destroyed, or shifting the blame of said tragedy on ourselves and others, leading to a break in relationships. Grief can have a supernatural and even godlike effect on the world around us. Original, unique, and real. That is what makes Hereditary scary at its core. Or at least I hope that's what the original intention was. Realism is an important part of a horror movie, if that was the intention of the director. But it is a risk because any break in that realism will make it seem that the movie has betrayed the audience. To make the audience suddenly suspend their disbelief after almost 2 hours into a realistic movie is not only jarring, but can ruin the gut punch a movie wants to deliver, which leads to the scene which closes the second act of Hereditary. Annie discovering that her mother was in some sort of cult that worshipped a devil is what some critics would say is a little too on the nose, as if some producer basically told the writers before they wrote the third act that no one in the audience is gonna get what's causing the conflict of the movie. So this plot development is not only sudden, but also kind of convenient to the story. Like when a parent dies, their adult children normally will go through their parents' belongings to get rid of their stuff, which Annie's mother clearly wanted her to do because she had left her a letter, but Annie doesn't open the letter until weeks later after her daughter dies. I guess you can assume that it was because Annie didn't have a good relationship with her mom, and that's why she didn't open the letter, but that still doesn't explain why Annie took care of literally every other item except for the box that revealed the secret of the movie. This idea of fate is kind of thrown away because we are told that everything was planned out by this cult to bring their demon god to life, which is kind of interesting, I'll admit, but I don't believe was the original intention of this film. There are a lot of things that are convenient for this movie that was meant to be more realistic. How did these cultists know Peter would run to the attic? What if he didn't? You put Toni Collette and yourselves up here for no reason. It didn't look too hard to escape. Annie is a tiny older woman. Just push her out of the way. Even if the demon has superpowers, I think the odds are in your favor to just run out the front door. You just saw the burnt corpse of your father and you think it's the best time to be exploring the house. I know this scene of Toni Collette cutting her own head off is gut-wrenching, but did anyone seriously look at these cultists and not laugh? They look ridiculous. We got a Kathy Bates lookalike and the "you know I gotta do it to them" kid. Look at this. How is that working? These frail old people can lift a full body up like that? How did you know that Peter wouldn't accidentally break a leg when jumping out the window? Kinda dumb when you start thinking about it. How did you get up here? Aren't tree houses built to only hold a few people at a time? You guys are a demonic cult, and the best thing you could offer a literal demon is 2 headless bodies and a Burger King crown? The cult is like 6 people? Not really impressive, but I guess it's hard to prove the existence of your demon, except you literally can prove its existence to anyone. Just look at that face. It's the same face actors give when they meet their cringy fans. At the end of the day, Hereditary is original and competent. Even if there were some plot decisions that hurt the movie, it is well shot, inventive, with great scenes performed by great actors. The music, composed by Colin Stetson, is beautiful and fits this movie perfectly. It is a good movie. It just isn't genre defining like John Carpenter's Halloween or Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you think this is a perfect movie, I would disagree but respect your belief in that. I just wanted to make a video explaining what makes this movie scary. It isn't cheap jump scares or graphic imagery, demons, or satanic cults. What makes Hereditary scary is us, the human experience of life, how people deal with tragedy, and how we change afterwards. The idea that we aren't in control of our destiny, or the idea that we are in control, but death can happen at any time, and there isn't a real way to prepare for it. In the end, it just all seems very real. Or you can just go see Midsommar and experience a perfect movie with no stupid ghosts.
It's summertime, and you know what that means. Gonna head out to the beach, gonna do some beachy things. It's summertime, feels just right. Gonna gather all my friends and we'll party through the night. Summertime, and love it. It's 11 in the summertime. Summertime, and love it. Oh baby, why can't you be mine? It's summertime, and I just can't wait. Gonna call you on the phone, gonna take you on a date. It's summertime, and I hope you like steak. Gonna take you to a restaurant and eat it at the lake. It's summertime.